Greetings, everyone. It is 6 o'clock on Sundays, and I'm Tiffany Norton. This is Comedy Centered. How are you? I'm a stand-up comedian and someone living with a late diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, neurodivergence, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I went to a movie with my friend Teresa. It's called The Substance. And so, spoiler alert, if you've not seen the movie The Substance yet with Demi Moore, I don't recommend it for everybody. I like gore and I like horror movies, and this was even a bit over the top for me at the end. You've not heard the premise of this. A really well-respected, popular, famous fitness instructor, and she has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and she's like an aerobics instructor, almost like a Jane Fonda-ish type, right? Basically, she finds out on her 50th birthday, which is tough for any woman or man. She gets fired. She overhears her boss basically making plans to replace her with someone who's younger. And she's approached by someone and offered, if she wants, she can change her life. This black market drug that is called The Substance. And The Substance promises to create another you, a better you. Okay? And so this is obviously a sci-fi kind of horror premise, but essentially, through the use of this substance, it creates a second Demi Moore. It creates a second character that's played by a different actress, a younger actress. And it is a version of her. It is her best self, but it's also when she's 25. Okay? The consciousness of the character played by Demi Moore can only live in one of these people at a time. And they have to switch back and forth every 7 days. So when one is awake, one is asleep. Okay? So for 7 days, it's Demi Moore at 50 years old, and then she goes to sleep, and then it's 7 days of the younger version of her, who is now becoming her own fitness influencer and living her best life. And eventually, there becomes rivalry between the two. They're sabotaging each other on each side. The younger one doesn't want to go back to sleep, wants to stay awake a little bit longer, and so goes beyond the 7 days. And because that happens, Demi Moore's character, the older character, is penalized. There's something bad that happens to her anytime more time is used by one side than the other. There's a consequence that can't be undone, right? And so back and forth. They just keep fighting each other, but they're never embodying the body at the same time. They're never embodying the consciousness at the same time. And it kind of dawned on me, that's a little bit like being blackout drunk. That's a little like drinking. You know, if you've had that situation, if you're a person who's struggled with alcohol misuse and overuse, as I have, it is almost like you are two different people in a constant state of battling ourselves, right? So it got me thinking, especially during the pandemic. It wasn't like I wasn't aware that I was drinking probably too heavily, but the pandemic really made it front and center. I think for a lot of people, I can distinctly remember situations where I'm like, I would wake up in the morning, I'm like, who did this? Who ate all this food? Who trashed the kitchen? Why is there crap everywhere? And so that was sober me. And so, in the morning, right? You wake up in the morning and you're like, all right, I feel good. I got good sleep. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to get this done. And by the end of the day, you don't even recognize yourself. By the end of the day, you're like a completely different person. You can't even remember how you even felt like that in the morning because now you're so exhausted and it's been the whole day and whatever. And one of the things that I noticed that when I would get really, really overwhelmed, I didn't realize at the time that I was neurodivergent. I didn't realize how sensitive I was to other people's emotions and stuff like that. One of the things I used to cope with it was wine. Cognitive dissonance, if you're not familiar with the term, is when you can hold two things as true that really don't go along together. This is often something that will happen to you if you've been gaslighted at all, if you've had a lot of experiences or were raised in an environment where there was maybe some narcissistic personality disorder. So holding that cognitive dissonance, that's where you get into double lives. And it's interesting to think about how those patterns can get set up, even from the early days of interacting with your family. For example, for me, my parents divorced when I was 12, and I have a younger brother who is 7.5 years younger. He's also paranoid schizophrenic. But they didn't know that then. And my parents had joint custody through the courts. And so I went back and forth from each house, and we switched during the middle of the week each week, but I had to be two different people depending on which house I was. There were different rules. There was different things you got in trouble for at different houses. Like on one house, it wouldn't be a big deal if you accidentally slammed a door or made a loud noise. The other house, there would be bad consequences. One house, you didn't have to finish everything on your plate. One, you did, you know? And so you end up learning, you start reading the cues, trying to figure out how you can fit into your family network. And that's when these cracks start. So double lives. Where does this idea come from that the past version of us was the better one, like the younger version of us was the better version? Well, not necessarily. I would never do my 20s again. But how do we assimilate into these different groups and give what they want? To feel safe, to feel accepted, to feel in there. Like, an addiction is one of the biggest ones. Everybody knows. It's like they have the secret gambling addiction. They have the secret drinking problem. They have the secret drug problem. There was that nurse Jackie. That was the whole premise of that show. A highly respected nurse, the top of her field, but then wildly addicted to painkillers and all the stuff that came with her trying to just feed her supply. Obviously, this movie was really geared more towards like being funny and feminist and making fun of the fact that we get so freaked out about aging and we do anything, even risking our own lives, risking our own identity, our own autonomy, going and getting black market drugs just to stay young, you know? There is that. But the thing that they keep saying throughout the movie, as the rivalry actually goes between the two halves of herself, there is a phone number for this place where you get the substance. And each half would call and complain about the other one. And they kept saying, remember, you are one. And eventually the reason why it all blows up and it doesn't end well for either character is because they couldn't integrate. The younger version could not respect the older version. And the older version couldn't understand why the younger version didn't respect it, because the younger version wouldn't be enjoying all the things the older version hadn't provided it first and taken the substance and created the younger version. And if you take a step back, especially from the gore, and like I said, there's a lot of gore. This is not that far-fetched of a premise. In fact, a lot of us are doing this every day. We're doing this every day, where we're actually two different people. We know we're not, but also we don't, you know? So what are some of the psychological costs? Long-term and short-term. Obviously feeling like whatever version of you that is truly you, if at a young age you did not feel like that was accepted in your family, or you had to show up in a different way, or you had to modify who you were in some way, those tendencies aren't that you're a bad person. Those were coping mechanisms. Those were strategies you had to implement to survive and to keep what little autonomy that you have left. But if that trauma never gets readdressed, then you are more likely to be running into these situations where there's the secret self that you hid from the family, the secret self that not everybody knows about, the other side, you know, similar to the movie, right? So what are some of the psychological costs of living in a state of having a double life? Obviously, fear, a lot of anxiety, guilt, identity issues, just an overall feeling of fraudulence throughout one's life. And last week we talked about imposter syndrome, or about showing up in your life and feeling like an imposter. Well, it's kind of this. I wasn't necessarily trying to correlate those two, but, you know, my research tends to circle around similar subjects. But if you have created this imposter, if you've created this double life, if you are a person who you had to be so perfect all the time at home, otherwise you would suffer psychological and actual physical damage possibly from not being perfect. Well, what do? You can't be perfect all the time. And so the way you cope is you go and you have your little secret things, like your secret activities, your secret stuff. And this will overall, of course, affect your self-esteem. It's going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect your relationship attachment style. You're more than likely going to be kind of nervous attachment relationship style where you're going to know like, you're the type of person who isn't totally honest all the time. So you're going to project that on your partner and think they're also not totally honest. Well, and maybe they are being dishonest, but maybe they're not. Maybe it's just you, you know? And you would think, well, why would someone want to live like this? Why would someone choose this? It's not a choice. I don't think it's a choice. I mean, I think once you recognize that these patterns exist, that you do owe it to yourself to start working on them and at least address them and say, hey, you know what? You know, I'm keeping a lot of secrets from people. I mean, it's not like when I was drinking a ton, I was going around telling everybody how much. You know, you keep that to yourself. I didn't even tell myself how much I was really drinking. How I used to know how much I drank the night before is I would go and I would pick up my box wine out of the fridge. I was like, ooh, it's pretty late. Ooh, I think we're down a pound. You know what? Because there's so much pressure in society for us to all just be perfect. Like, we've all got to figure it out. It's all fine. Everything's fine. No problems here. And so, until you close the doors and you draw the blinds and then, you know? So, the escapism is where the double life will end up taking you, but the need for escapism really makes sense, especially if you grew up in a chaotic or a mentally or a physically abusive household. You were literally trying to escape. I know I did. I ran away quite a few times. I wasn't really good at it, though. I didn't get very far. But we all want to escape feeling bad about ourselves, about others, about our family, about our careers, about our age, about aging, about all of this stuff. Escape is just temporary. It solves nothing. We know that. But it can feel good. It can feel like a reprieve. And it can also feel really nice and warm and cozy, like it's your own little thing that nobody knows about. You know? There's sometimes some thrill in deceiving. Some thrill in deception. There's some thrill in, exploring a different identity. Maybe you're a person that, due to religious or familial ties, you don't feel comfortable fully expressing who you are gender-wise. Maybe you were raised in a gender-conforming household. And, well, it makes sense to keep yourself protected. It makes sense to start out not telling everybody. Experimenting with your personality. I mean, some of these things can be healthy. But when you start believing that one person's doing one thing in your head and another person's doing another thing in your head, and it's not both you at the same time, that's where you can really cause some very deep psychological harm to yourself. And that's where the cognitive dissonance comes back in. Like, why do people lie in the middle of addictions? The reason why people lie is they just don't want you to find out they're not perfect. That's really the only reason. I mean, that's mostly the reason. And they don't want to get in trouble. I mean, why do you lie to a police officer? She don't want to get in trouble. Why lie to your mom? She don't want to get in trouble. Often we've got so much pressure in this society of having this, like, perfect image that if someone's going to say something bad about you or bring up something that they didn't like about that you did, if you have carefully cultivated and are presenting as the actual you, when that gets criticized, it's devastating. Because you've worked so hard to make this projection the perfect projection. I did all this to protect myself from ever being criticized again. But remember that is impossible. When I was younger, I used to think if I was perfect and if I timed everything right, I could run through the rain exactly in the right pattern and not get wet and not have one drop fall on me. It doesn't work. I tried it a lot. I was like, finally, if I could like matrix it, I would. And again, what I've learned in my stuff is that there's only one thing you can really count on in life, and that's lessons. There will be lessons. That's it. There's gonna be lessons. Lessons you learn, you don't have to relearn. Lessons you don't learn, you repeat. So, if any of this is resonating in any way with anybody, or you have additional comments or things that you want to go my way, I'd love to hear it. But you have to have a lot of courage to show up as yourself. And if there's things that you think are just so awful that you can't tell anybody and no one would understand, just start by journaling it. You know, you don't have to tell someone, you know, and then you can burn it right away. Just get rid of it, you know? But the more that you realize the parts of yourself that you divorce, the parts of yourself that you reject, they're still you. And you're rejecting a part of yourself. And you can't love yourself fully. And you can't be your whole authentic self if there's aspects of who you are that you absolutely can't stand. So if there's something that you're working on, be it mental health, be it physical health, be it, you know, just, I don't know, some kind of major change you're trying to make in your life. Good for you for showing up. You're showing courage by putting yourself in the path of information, in the path of thought-provoking conversation, and you're at least considering it. That in and of itself is a radical act. Not a lot of people will slow down and even bother to do any of that kind of self-analysis. But I want to encourage you because it gets old. It's old. It gets old. You know? Constantly finding out more stuff about yourself that you're like, oh man, I don't like that part about myself. Well, you know what? I have to own it. If I don't like the way that clothes are fitting, well, then maybe I can do some things. Maybe I can change it. But to reject who I am and to say this part of me is good and that part of me is bad, well, that childhood probably a lot of times. And it's our own inner child labeling it. That's simply like good, bad, right, wrong. No one's good or bad. No one's right or wrong. We're all creative people having a very interesting and unpredictable experience. So, anyway, I hope that helps. Have a great week, everyone. Stay centered as much as possible. And also, if you go and see The Substance, let me know what you think. Like I said, I'm warning you. There's a lot of it's gory. If you do not like gore, maybe skip that one. All right, you guys, have a great night.